For almost a century and a half, it stood as one of history's greatest, most chilling unsolved mysteries, the total disappearance of the Franklin expedition. So, let's dive into how modern science finally cracked this incredibly cold case. Okay, to really get the story, you have to transport yourself back to the 1840s. The Arctic, it wasn't just a place on a map. For the British Empire, it was this mythical, almost magical realm. A beautiful but incredibly dangerous otherworld, the ultimate testing ground for heroes.
And that's what makes this whole thing so baffling. This wasn't some shoestring operation. The question that haunted people for generations was pretty straightforward. How do 129 men on two of the most high-tech ships on the planet just sail off the face of the Earth?
To really feel the shock of their disappearance, you first have to understand just how prepared this expedition was supposed to be. I mean, this was the mission that absolutely could not fail.
Just think about that number for a second. 129 people. Officers, sailors, scientists, the whole crew. Not a single one of them ever came home.
And the man in charge was Sir John Franklin, a seasoned Arctic veteran. At 59, they basically gave him the command because, as one official famously said, if you don't let him go, the man will die of disappointment. So yeah, confidence was sky high.
And just look at the gear they had. We're not talking about simple wooden ships. No way. These things were reinforced with iron plating. They had steam engines, central heating, enough canned food to last for 3 years. And get this, a library with 1,700 books. They were basically the starships of their day.
So, late July 1845, 2 whaling ships spot the Erebus and Terror tied to an iceberg, just waiting for the ice to clear a path. The crews are in great spirits. Everything's going to plan. It was the last time any European ever saw them again. After that, just silence.
For decades, search parties found almost nothing, just a few heartbreaking clues. The first winter camp, a few graves, a single tragic note left under a pile of rocks. And then the trail went cold for over 100 years, until 1981, when a totally new kind of explorer entered the picture.
And this is where the story takes a sharp turn, from a historical mystery to a modern-day forensic investigation. It was led by an anthropologist named Owen Beattie, and he decided to treat the entire expedition like one giant frozen crime scene.
Beattie started right where the last survivors were thought to have died, on the really bleak shores of King William Island. His team found scattered human bones, a piece of a clay pipe, a button, just tiny little pieces of a huge disaster, worn down by nearly 140 harsh Arctic winters.
At first glance, the bones seemed to point to a familiar culprit, scurvy, a killer that haunted long sea voyages. But for Beattie, something just didn't add up. It felt like a massive piece of the puzzle was still missing.
Then he had a brilliant idea. Maybe the answer wasn't with the last men to die, but with the first. So he turned his focus to Beattie Island, the spot where the expedition spent its very first winter.
On this island were the graves of 3 young sailors who had died way back in 1846. John Torrington, John Hartnell, and William Brain. Buried in the permafrost, their graves were perfect little time capsules, preserved from a moment before everything went completely sideways. And here's a wild fact. The idea to check the bodies was actually floated way back in 1852 by a surgeon on a search party. He guessed they'd be perfectly frozen, but at the time, the idea was considered, well, improper. More than 130 years later, Beattie's team got the permits to do exactly that.
So, after hours of carefully thawing the ground, they opened the coffin of Petty Officer John Torrington, and what they saw was absolutely staggering. A face, perfectly preserved for 138 years, staring right back at them. As one writer put it, he was a messenger sent through time to tell a story.
And the story Torrington had to tell would change everything. The real clues weren't on his body, but in it, in the tissue and hair that could now be analyzed with modern technology. The mystery was about to move from the frozen tundra into the forensics lab.
The team started testing for a hidden killer, lead. Now, lead poisoning is truly devastating. It attacks your body, sure, but the real damage is what it does to your mind. It causes confusion, irritability, and makes it impossible to make good decisions.
When the lab results came back, they were just shocking. The levels of lead in Torrington's system weren't just high, they were off the charts, astronomical. It proved he'd been exposed to a severe, constant dose of lead right from the very beginning of the voyage.
But where did it all come from? Well, the evidence pointed to one of the expedition's proudest innovations, It's 8,000 cans of preserved food. The contract was a rush job, and the tins were sealed with thick beads of lead solder. It was so sloppy that lead was literally dripping into their food with every single meal.
And here's the truly tragic twist. Lead poisoning is a master of disguise. Its symptoms mimic other illnesses. You can just imagine the ship's doctors seeing weakness, stomach pain, gum problems, and diagnosing the one thing they all feared, scurvy. They had no idea the real enemy was the very food that was supposed to save them.
With this one breakthrough discovery, the entire 140-year-old story had to be completely rewritten. This wasn't just about bad luck or getting stuck in the ice anymore.
The author Margaret Atwood, thinking about Beattie's findings, she just summed it up perfectly. Sir John Franklin wasn't a failed hero. Instead, he was a victim of something shockingly modern: bad packaging.
So the true story is actually much more horrifying. The crew wasn't just sick, they were slowly being driven mad. Weakened, confused, and with their judgment totally clouded by lead poisoning, they made a string of terrible decisions that ended with them abandoning their ships for a desperate, doomed march south.
The solving of the Franklin mystery is just an incredible testament to the power of forensic science. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other truths are out there, preserved in ice or buried in the earth, just waiting for the right tools and the right questions to finally bring them into the light?